Hi, my name is Richard Norman. I'm the author of the American Handbook on Guns, Ammo, and Freedom. Some years ago, my grandfather told a story about how he left the Ukraine and how the Russians had overthrown the area and they would starve to death 14 million people. The farmers in the Ukraine wouldn't give up their lands to the Russians and farm for free. And the Russians wanted their crops. So my grandfather said they hauled in wooden vats and they called the farmers in for a meeting and they put a pump in the town well. And then they picked a farmer and they go, "You into the vat." And within that vat there was a set of chains, and they chained that man to the bottom of that vat and gave him a teacup. They turned on the pump, and soon his cries and screams were followed by silence as the water crested. After his drowning, they pulled the plug on the vat, emptied the water, threw the corpse on the ground, and picked another farmer, "You into the vat." My mother told me those stories since I was young. From history, Stalin said he would push the bony hand of the Ukrainians against their own throat, and he starved to death 14 million of them. My grandfather was fortunate enough to leave the country, or to get out of the country before that happened. That story's in the front of my book. Sometime later, while I lived in El Paso, Texas, Fort Bliss was where we lived next to, and we were members of the church, and a man came in that was a member of our church as well. And his kids were in Boy Scouts at the same time my boy was in Boy Scouts. And he had an interesting story to tell about how he was being trained in national disarmament. Now, if I would have just heard the story on a one-time thing, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. But this man moved in with our congregation and with his family. They lived their religion. And he told the same story to anybody he could get to listen, to leave a verbal record. He was put on what the military calls permanent party. That means they'll leave a person there for 2.5 or 3 years. He was there about 2.5 years, and I got to know him personally. And pretty soon the realization was that what he was planning, or what they were planning to do, was absolutely exactly what they did in Russia. The question in my life was, do I do something or do I do nothing? So I began collecting information, bullet casting and other things, of how to make enough ammunition to supply an army in an emergency. In World War II France, the people there, we watch the movies and you see them with a mouse-page of different rifles or pistols or whatever, and that's not the way it was for World War II French resistance. French resistance during World War II had on the average of 2 guns for every 60 to 80 men. You know what most of those people died with? They died with a knife in their hand cutting phone lines or slashing German tires because they didn't know how to do anything else. So I started walking the floors at night after this realization that what this man was telling me had been done before. It had been repeated in the past. And that was a result of my first book, and people misunderstood the title of it, American Handbook on All-American Anti-Disarmament Handbook. This book took me quite a number of years to write. I took machinist courses and other things so that I'd have some knowledge of the things I was talking about. People misunderstood the title though. And on the internet, they wouldn't log as a gun book. And I spent week after week after week calling them and asking them, why isn't it logged with a gun book? They said, well, it's on disarmament, so we have to put it in disarmament. It became brutally apparent I'd have to change the name of the book for the sake of those who saw it as well as for the book itself. This is a third larger American Handbook on Guns, Ammo, and Freedom. Now, as of the making of this video, they still will not put it with gun books, even though it says it's on guns and ammunition. I think there's some very big controls going on in the country. What I've done is to put together a pre-war resistance manual. This manual will give you everything that you need to know to make guns, powder, primers, and ammunition. How to harden metal, how to make gun parts, how to do anything you need to salvage parts. And I'm going to go through in a minute, I'll explain that to you. The goal in writing this book was to place within your hands everything you need to know in an emergency. This book will literally let you walk in and walk out with something that will shoot. Now, it starts off with just a few pages on explosive devices. This is not like the Anarchist Cookbook. 99% of this is absolutely 100% about what you're going to be doing and using if you had to make your gun go. It starts with simplistic weapons. This is a Bowie knife. It was made out of a truck leaf spring. In an emergency, you could salvage metal and do all kinds of things that you could make very formidable tools with. This talks about strike points, how to bludge your opponent, how to work him over if you had to in an emergency in order to retrieve a better weapon. Everything to use about a knife that I could find was put within a few pages so that you'd have some ability to develop some skill in that area if you needed something better. This section's on how to use files. Using a file is important because you may have to make a gun repair part. If they outlaw guns in America, the time will come when you may have to make what you have or do without. This is the metal hardening section, and again, I'm skipping a whole bunch of stuff in between all of this. These are spark patterns. So this will tell you on the salvaged metal what carbon content there is in the steel, which makes it much easier. And then when you make a part, it'll be a good part. And then when you harden a part, it'll be a very good gun part. This is a weed burner. This is the spring making section. This will tell you how to make springs. This thing gets up to 16 to 1800 degrees. This is the truck salvage section or metal salvage section. To make guns, you're going to need flat metal, and you're going to need a lot of it. This is not talking about auto theft. This is talking about wartime scavenging. Out of these truck frames, this Ford F-150 will give you the most return. Take out 6 bolts, flip the bed. 2 men can do that. Take off the gas tank, throw it aside. There's only a few bolts involved there. Take a blowtorch and torch it underneath the cab and drag it back, and you have leaf springs for knives as well as flat metal for making gun parts. These are battery post cleaning caps, just straight out off of the factory. Take 6 to 7, maybe 8 pressing procedures to make this part. This is a Sten submachine gun locking cap. With a grinder, you can grind off the bottom of the battery post cleaner, and look at that. You end up with a submachine gun part. It needs a little nub at the top, which I didn't finish because I didn't want to go to jail for making gun parts. This is an axle off of a Ford Taurus. This is very close to these. This is a World War II Sten submachine gun bolt. This is made of bronze, not a very good metal for a machine gun. It was made for one-time use, probably for clandestine operations. It's very soft comparatively to steel, but much more quiet in a machine gun if it was used with a silencer. This is normal Sten production. Again, these are collectibles. They have a fixed firing dimple. They don't have a firing pin. So it works on slam fire principle. When you pull the trigger, it strips the round, jams it in the chamber, and from that weight of this whole thing, the dimple causes the primer to pierce, and then on recoil it just keeps going until you let off the trigger and it fires from open bolt again. I called the BATF to make sure that I was within standards of not creating any parts that would be against the law. I did not finish this part because I do not want to go to jail. This was made with files, hacksaw, drill press, wood cutting jigsaw with a metal cutting blade, chisels, and hose clamps. This bar stock has no turn marks on it because it's the same size as the bar stock they used in World War II to make this. A few drill marks, a few other adaptations, and the firing dimple, and this would be a working part. But again, I didn't finish it because I don't want to go to jail. This is the clip making and manufacturing system. This will show you how to make a clip making machine so that you come up with the best possible products while you're making it. We've already talked about spring making, and so this talks about how to make that type of machinery. This is the beginning of emergency reloading. In this section, you can knock out the primers without reloading equipment. If this were a shell casing, you would fill it full of water, set it on a washer. You take a close-fitting bolt, stick in the hole, hit it with a hammer about that hard, creates thousands of pounds of pressure, and it knocks the primer out. You flatten it with a nail. You can use kid caps in this section, strike anywhere. Match heads could be turned into a paste and used as a primer, and the remainder of the match head can be turned into a propellant. And a piece of bolt could be a projectile. So even if you're completely out of ammo, you can gather things from around the house and come off with something that'll shoot. Most of us in an emergency wouldn't want to give away our guns. We couldn't afford to do it. But most Americans could afford, that shoot, to give up 100 rounds of ammo. These are emergency pipe guns developed by the military. If you gave up 100 rounds of ammo and gave 2 bullets per gun, you could arm 50 men, and they would be better armed than French resistance was in World War II. This is chemical extractions. This is nitric acid. It can be used for metal hardening, for what's called low heat hardening, or it can be used to make propellants that are smokeless. Some of the instructions are here. You would want to recruit a chemical engineer, and again, if this was an emergency, you'd be looking for people who could do some of these things. And then the formulas are listed here. There's actually 11 of them. It says 10 at the top, but one's in the instructions at the beginning. Potassium nitrate. You can't buy it anymore, but this is a military extract. This is taken out of dirt with hot water. 60 to 80% solubility rate. Once that water is hot, you chill it or cool it, or you can use alcohol, and it goes through step by step on how to make the black powder. These are black powder charging section. Again, I'm skipping a whole bunch between all of this stuff. These are just some of the highlights. This isn't even going to be 1/10 of what's written in here. Black powder charges for metallic shell casings. You need to weigh and measure your powder. You can adapt a gram scale to grains, or with this section, it tells you how to make a homemade powder scale, and here it has aluminum cutouts from soda cans to make the counterbalance weights. In an emergency, you might not know what gun you have. You might have to pick up a gun. Some of them aren't stamped. You don't know what caliber it is. In a normal gun shop, they do a chamber cast. You could use sulfur and do the same thing. You put a wad of paper down the barrel just past the chamber. You heat up some sulfur in a spoon. You dump it in. When it turns green, you dump it in, and it makes a nice little chamber cast, and you know what kind of ammunition that gun will take. This section's on how to reload a .22 shell casing. Literally, you can repack the primer, refill the shell casing, remake a projectile, or you can swage it into a .223 bullet head with a lead core, which would make this absolutely phenomenal. Nothing goes to waste. They've outlawed, actually have gotten rid of all of our lead manufacturing in America as of this last year. They've closed every one of our lead sites that smelter. You'd have to have $200 million to open a lead smelter in America today. I think by plan. We may have to shoot steel projectiles. This is a piece of concrete reinforcing bar. I made these too pretty. They could just be cut off pieces of bolt. These would be paper patched. You can wrap them with paper. These are wood sabots. So a dead tree will offer you all kinds of wood sabots that you could make to use projectiles and load them on different types of ammunition. These are brake rotors off of a car. You drill holes in them for the caliber, the size you want. They have to be the solid rotors, and any mechanic can tell you what car has solid rotors, not the vented type. You take the other rotor and you put it on the bottom. Put the one with holes on the top, put on a splash of lead. Now you have a flat base on the bottom. You take a chisel, lead is soft, so this is an easy process. Shear it off with a chisel, knock it out with a punch, and you have all kinds of wad cutter bullets. This is the good casting section. This talks about how to use good equipment if it can be had. But if it can't be, this is a turkey roaster. And if you take a turkey roaster and you set it up with this mold, at that point you can go into production with kids in an hour. Alternatives to shot shells. The front struts on cars have all kinds of round bar stock of varying sizes. This will shoot a .38 caliber bullet in a shotgun. Even the rustiest old shotgun that you'll find in the country, it'd be safe to hold it next to your face. But I wouldn't want to do it with a normal shotgun shell. This is the shot making section. And again, this is dealing with if you have enough lead. Some areas may have lead mines that are closed. You might be able to scavenge and salvage. In this section you can make shot, and it tells you how it's done, and it only has to fall 1/4 of an inch to make good round shot. This is a radiation meter section. We may have a war. This was developed by Oak Ridge Laboratories. This is made with a tomato sauce can, dental floss, piece of doorbell wire, piece of a pencil, pieces of sheetrock, and tin foil. And it makes a meter as accurate as any you can buy. And then at the back of the book is emergency fuels for travel, for production, or for making anything that you want in an emergency, or for emergency weaponry like emergency napalm and other things. So everything from production use of fuel all the way through to creating stuff that you need, from simplistic to the more complicated. I hope you've enjoyed this little presentation. This is the ultimate manual for putting you in a position where you have everything that you'd ever want in a book. No batteries are needed. It doesn't have to fall apart if your computer crashes. There's no hard drive to have to worry about. But this is wonderful information. It's the best doomsday prepper manual that you will ever get your hands on. May the Lord bless you.